Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today we have a special unboxing for you. So that box is right here. It's a big old boy. Let's go ahead and dig in. All right, very nice packing. We got a lot of paper and bubble wrap in here for this cased guitar. As you may have expected, it is a guitar. Oh my God, that was hard. All right, here we go. What's in the case? We've got 4 latches on this hard shell case. We have a Peavey Vortex 2. So this is Peavey's take on the Flying V. Let me go ahead and spin this around so you can see it a little bit better. So this thing is just a real class act of a black guitar. Here you can see our Vortex 2 branding, made in the USA by Peavey. So you may say, wow, what a sweet looking ebony fretboard. And you would actually be incorrect with that assumption. This is a phenolic fretboard, which if you're not sure what that is, it's a plastic kind of pre-rich light, but it's really smooth and it's basically like a glossed over Fender fretboard, but it is in fact a phenolic fretboard. We have some pretty rowdy looking humbuckers here. These are the stock Peavey humbuckers with like the riveted style magnet pull pieces and everything else. So pretty burly looking piece. And then we have our Kaler tremolo. This is pretty standard on these guitars. I believe they were all sold with the Kaler trem. The knobs are Peavey's kind of speed knobs. They're pretty cool. They have a plastic little knurled section that does real well. Got a little switch tip here, 3-way. And yeah, really cool guitar. Let's take a look at the back. So the back looks very much like you might expect. It is a bolt-on neck. You can see our strap button there right in the center, and plus our tilt function right here. That hole is to adjust the tilt, but usually I've read that you do not want to do that on these old Peaveys because they can poke right through the fretboard if you poke hard enough on that. So here you go once again, our US patent plus our serial number of 02441340. This is a 1985 guitar, I believe. Of course, you can imagine that these guitars being all pointy and whatnot from the 80s, they took a beating with regards to the points. That is the case on both points. It's not the end of the world, but there's a few chips and it looks worse from behind for sure than it does from the front, but that's to be expected on a guitar this old with this kind of style of guitar. Otherwise, we don't have any other wear points or cracks or anything like that that I can see. The neck looks really good. And this case, pretty cool. I dig the case. It is purpose built for this guitar, obviously. No other guitar would fit in here. I don't even think the Jacksons or modern Flying Vs would. All slightly different. This should be a 25.5 inch scale length, I believe. We'll have to double check that, but you do have a locking nut on this Kaler trem system. So real 80s stock coolness. Our fretboard is really nicely rounded off, and I assume the phenolic fretboard is a molded type board, but I really don't know how they're made, so I could be wrong, but they mold a really nice rounded edge into the board, and it just feels perfect without having to do any work there. And the frets are not sprouting out as is common on these Peaveys, so maybe that's another benefit to the phenolic fretboard, is it doesn't sprout as much. I don't know. All right, so I know that it doesn't seem like it's been a while for you, but for me, it's been many days since I've opened this box and been able to give this the proper review that it needs. We now have the full jam space ready to use, and if you haven't caught up on my previous video where I introduced you to the space at large, then go ahead and check that out. I'll link it below. But right now we've got this Peavey Vortex strapped up, and the reason that I'm standing strapped is I don't usually do that for these videos. I'm usually seated, and you know, let me show you why. I'll just go ahead and, okay, well, where does it sit? Nope, not like that. How about, nope, not like that. It's very awkward to play seated. In fact, I found it impossible to play comfortably seated. So we're gonna run with a strap, no problem. This is pretty much the worst place that they could have put this jack, just because that's where you want your leg to be. And if you do have any familiarity with the Gibson Flying V or any Flying V style instrument, you'll usually have the ability to just rest it between your legs like that, kind of classical guitar style like. But beyond that, it's still a great axe. It sounds really great. And the good news is that I have had a little bit of time to live with this thing and play it quite a bit. I've tried recording with it, and it does really well. It's very quiet. Let me just turn the volume up. Volume's up. I'm not going to strum to show you, but you can see that hardly any change in the sound in the room or on the mic behind me. So before we get too deep into things, how are we capturing the sound? Right now, the Peavey Vortex 2 is plugged into my pedal board, which is then being plugged directly into this Marshall 1987X Plexi 50-watt head. That is being plugged into this orange 2x12 PPC, you know, regular standard orange 2x12 cabinet. However, I did swap out the speakers. The V30s I changed for creambacks. So we have creambacks in this cabin. It's now become my new favorite once again. I fell in love with it all over, and it sounds great with all different kinds of guitars, pickups, amps, pedals, you name it. So that's what we're going to be running with today. Capturing the sound, I have one microphone, a Sennheiser E906 on the right side of the speaker. So, you know, it's just right there capturing the sound. And I'm going to move it over just a hair. Just like that. And it's slightly off center, so it should give us a nice representative sound of what this guitar sounds like through an amp and cabinet. So beyond that, what do we have? Let's recap once again. We have a maple body with a maple neck. This is kind of an odd spec for Peavey. You don't see that very often, a maple body and a maple neck. Very often you'll find swamp ash bodies or basswood or poplar or other woods other than maple for the body. The neck, very much you'll find a maple neck on most Peaveys of this era. This is a 1985, I believe. It's kind of hard to tell from the serial number, but it's generally known that these are a 1985 guitar creation, and they don't exist much beyond that. There might be some 86s out there, but for the most part, this is an 85 model. So a maple, but we have a departure when it comes to the fretboard. We talked about this. It's the phenolic resin fretboard. This is not a maple fretboard that's dyed black. It's not ebony. It's very, very different from that. It's a resin that cures and hardens and feels very much like a resin. And it's not that it doesn't feel like a good fretboard. It actually has all the characteristics one would want in a fretboard. It's smooth, it's tough, it's black. I love an ebony fretboard. It's really a sexy look, and it pops well with these mother of pearl dot inlays, or maybe they're acrylic. That's one spec I wasn't able to find, but they do look like mother of pearl to me, unless they're just very active plastic. It's a plastic fretboard, so they're probably acrylic, but let's just hope and pray, and maybe they will be mother of pearl. But otherwise, we have two Peavey P12. That means that we have 12 adjustable pole pieces on each pickup. And you can see that the pole pieces are the circular kinds, and they do raise up and down. They are P12 humbucking pickups from Peavey, and they're quiet, they're loud when they need to be. They're a really nice pickup. I don't know why they went away from them, or maybe they kind of developed them into other humbucking style pickups in the future, but either way, you don't see these too often outside of this era of the Peavey guitar. We have a Kaler. I think it's a actual Kaler. Yeah, license. It's not licensed by, it's an actual Kaler made in USA, so that's a nice spec. And we do have the locking nut up here. I've heard some kind of negative things about this particular locking nut, that it doesn't hold quite as well. It does have a very, very small Allen key adjuster, so there's kind of knurled knobs on the, knurls on the side, so you can spin them with your fingers, but I'll bet a lot of these get stripped out pretty easily just because that Allen key adjuster is so tiny. Otherwise, the nut itself is synthetic. It's a black material to match the board. I don't think it's the same phenolic resin. I think it's a different graph tech or whatever that material is, style of nut. So again, no traditional natural materials here other than the maple body and the maple neck. The tuners are the small style. They're not like minis or anything, but they're just small to fit on the back of this pointy headstock. And they work really well. That's actually one of my biggest complaints about Peavey guitars of this era. And you know, we're 30 plus years in advance of this guitar being made, so almost pushing 40 that is. And these tuners, they've held up really, really well. And you know, it's hard to expect tuners and anything that's small and moves to hold up that long. So maybe that's just an unrealistic expectation on my part. But either way, I think these are really good quality tuners and I'm happy about that. I haven't even used this locking nut, honestly. You can tell that I'm just kind of winding these here. They're not really affecting the stability of the strings. And if you're not familiar with a Kahler tremolo, it works very similar to a Floyd Rose. And if you're not familiar with what a Floyd Rose is or a Strat style tremolo, it's basically a bit on the bridge that allows it to go wow, 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 and to affect your pitch up and down in a kind of wah wah manner. That's why it's called a whammy bar in most cases. So the Kahler tremolo is unique in that it kind of is low profile. It's very small for an up and down tremolo, but it has its own unique style, and these roller saddles contribute, and we have our tuning adjustment right here. So that's our fine tuners. Again, I'm not using the fine tuners, I'm using the regular tuners here, and they hold perfectly. I guess I could engage this, but the sad part is that the previous owner just lost the arm, so I don't have a Kahler tremolo arm. I'll have to double check. I might on my Chandler. That's my most buried guitar. But right now, I'm running without it, and it plays just fine. So no problems. And one of the things that I love about this guitar and this platform, the Vortex platform, is the two simple volume and tone toggles with a three-way switch. 1, 2, 3. And I've also heard some complaints on forums doing a little research about this switch being kind of weak. And I can see why. It's barely hanging on, but it stays put in either position. So it's not going to just fly out and change your tone wildly. So you don't have to worry about that. But just be aware that these switches are prone to just kind of wear out and you need to replace them. But the two speed knobs, really nice look, knurled. So you can just grab them and do volume swells really, really easily. I don't think you're going to use the tone knob too much, but it's there and it works. So really simple control layout, no push-pull, no taps, no coil splits, no garbage, just straight ahead rockin' metal guitar. Think about the era in which this guitar was birthed, 1985. That was right smack dab in the hair metal era. There's no hint of grunge in the air. There's no hint of R&B taking over the pop charts and pop music. All of that comes in the 90s in the future. So this is pretty firmly in the hair metal era when just ripping humbucking style guitars were king, and the pointier the better. This guitar has suffered the same fate as most pointy guitars of the era. You know, what are you going to expect? This is a pretty good chip here. Not too happy about that one, but it's on the back side, and what are you going to do? You can't really go back. Once it's chipped, it's chipped. And every single corner on this one has suffered a similar fate. Some are worse than others. The headstock is probably the least offended. It's mostly black here. In fact, I don't think it's chipped at all, but it's definitely taken a ding or two, and it's not perfect. But that's what I love about these Peavey US guitars, is that they are US made quality and at a fraction of the price. So you can typically find these guitars under that $600 range. That's pretty realistic, all fees included, shipping, etc. And if you can find one, I say go ahead and pick one up and give it a shot. The necks are sometimes prone to bananaing a little bit, and I don't think this particular model suffers from that because this maple neck feels rock solid. And I think the phenolic the fretboard actually adds a little bit of stability as well. It's not going to change like ebony or rosewood. It's just going to stay put, and the maple is a notoriously stable wood anyway. This one, yeah, pretty rock solid. And the action is super low. It's a really great feeling guitar, one that takes you back in the years or decades. Another complaint or small complaint about this guitar, the strap lock or strap buttons, they are pretty large. I'll give you a close-up of those. They're pretty large, but again, the placement is not ideal. This back one is right here, and it's slipped off on me more than once, we'll say. It's not all the time, and maybe it's some user error by not ensuring that it's completely around the button, but they're just not ideal. I would definitely recommend switching these out for locking strap locks and just eliminate the problem altogether. Otherwise, the points are going to be pointing right at the ground, and you're just going to take more wood off chip by chip. So we want to avoid that. Maple is precious, and actually these chips provide a little bit of insight into the maple. You can see that it's a little bit maple colored. It's not entirely conclusive, but it's pretty light colored wood. So that to me says, yeah, maple, no funny business. That's what we got. So we have 22 frets on the fretboard, and speaking of neck and fretboard and feel, I would say that the overall feel of this neck is very Strat-like. And I don't know if Peavey is trying to go for the Strat feel, but they kind of achieved it regardless. And it might have to do with the straight string pull here. There's no setback tilt here. And the shape of it is kind of a, I don't know, maybe like a 60s C shape. And other than that, it's a 25.5-inch scale length. So it's not a Gibson. It's not trying to be a Gibson Flying V. It's trying to be more of a shredder guitar, and that's typically going to have the 25.5-inch scale length, the Super Strat scale length. And this obviously has very little in common with the Strat other than that, pickups, layout, body, materials, you name it. But I think just based on feel, you can say that there's a Strat in here somewhere, and I think if you put it in the middle, the middle position, you can, I don't know, I'm not even going to try to say that you can achieve Strat tones, but you can come close, and that's one of the beauties of these guitars, is they do have a lot more versatility than people want to give them credit for. So let's go ahead and hear what this thing sounds like after all that, and see if we can make some cool sounds with it. So here we are, just regular, full volume, full tone in the bridge, which is, yep, that's hot. So here we are in the bridge. Here's an E chord. So really usable, clean tones. This guitar might have heavier intentions in it, but that doesn't mean that it won't sweeten up. So here that bridge is one more time. Here's the neck. And that to me is where this guitar sounds the most Gibson-y, is in that neck position. And that might be a controversial thing to say because nothing else about this guitar says Gibson, even the V shape is wrong. But the neck position does sound thick and rich, kind of like a classic 57 or even a 498R. One of those styles of pickups, warm, round, and vintagey sounding, but able to jump that gain up if necessary. So here's that neck pickup one more time. So it wants to break up there towards the end. It's not really that gainy. I'm not saying that it's overpowering the amp, but you can get some punchy, crispy sounds out of that clean tone with that neck humbucker. like it a lot. The middle position is really usable too. Like I said, versatility in this guitar, and I don't usually get out of the bridge too often, but I found myself just gravitating towards the middle on this guitar, and it's got a real nice sweetness with some of the cut. So here you go, middle position, P12 humbuckers. So the middle position is just, it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's not that bright as the bridge, not as mellow as the neck, just like Goldilocks, right in the middle. Nice. So this guitar wants to rip. I'll be honest, playing it clean is fine and dandy and all of that, but when you engage the dirt, that's when this thing comes alive. So let's just start with the Distortion DS1 pedal. Go right, 80s for 80s. I think the DS1 came out slightly before 1985, but either way it was around and it would have been a likely complement for this guitar. So here you go, Boss DS1 into the Vortex. So that sounds great. That's just the 80s. That's so much music. You can get crunchy and then fun with. Really usable rhythm or lead tone. Let's just hear a little bit of lead with that. So I had no reservations about the DS1 pedal and this guitar. I thought they would be a great pair, and lo and behold, that is true. So let's go up the scale again and go right to the metal zone. And again, we're in the Marshall Plexi 1987X. It's a pretty gainy amplifier on its own. I'm in channel 2, and I've got the loudness at 2. So this is very, very low on what this amp is capable of. But I think it's a great pedal platform, and it's not working too hard. It's still sounding great. And if I want to crank it, I always can and do sometimes. But here we go, the metal zone through the 1987X with the Peavey Vortex 2. So we get a little bit of noise through there. I did not have my noise gate turned on just because I thought that it would be worth checking it out without. Here's with that noise gate on one last time. It's a lot quieter. Oh, it'd help if I turn it up. Takes care of most of the noise with the noise gate on. Pretty awesome. This guitar is a lot of fun and US made. I can't say that enough. This is a USA made guitar with maple hardwood body, just great quality, great value, and I highly suggest you check these out. And I kind of feel like I'm shooting myself in the foot a little bit by showcasing these instruments because in a lot of senses they're unknown. People don't really have a good sense of why you would pay $600 for a Peavey versus, let's say, $800 or $900 for a Fender Mexico. And, you know, I think there's a lot of valid points in either side, but at the end of the day, if you can try a US-made guitar here for that value, it may sound like shit. I don't know. There's no guarantee that it will sound great. It seems like there's a lot of value out there that's underappreciated, and maybe you can find that for yourself. So, Peavey Vortex 2, we mentioned the Peavey Vortex 1. What is it? It's the Explorer-esque style. It's obviously a lot more pointy and more jagged, and it's not as proportional as the Explorer. It's slightly different proportions. So, that's the Peavey Vortex 1. It's the same pickups, same hard rock maple body and neck, the same phenolic board, and same appointments otherwise. It's just a different shape. And a lot of the times you'll see, well, not a lot of the times, I don't want to say that because maybe in the future that won't be the case, but in a few instances, I have seen both the Vortex 1 and 2 being sold together as a pair. And I think that's because a lot of, I don't know, rock, metal, or fans of hard music purchased both of them together back in the day and maybe gigged with one and kept the other back, or maybe gigged with both, or maybe gigged with neither of them and they just happen to have both and they're selling them as a pair now. So it's if that's the case, go ahead and pick them up, but either way you can find them individually and they're both great guitars. I assume the other one is based on the quality of this one. All right, let's go ahead and put this guitar in the context of a band. I like to create a loop with bass guitar, drums, and then play a lead over that to give you kind of a fuller texture to understand what this guitar is capable of. So let's do a little rhythm plus lead and call it a day. So what are my final thoughts on this guitar? I think that it's a perfect guitar for a lot of different music, and it's a really fun guitar for a lot of other different music, including the music it's intended for. And it's just a really funky, cool, pointy, just gnarly out there guitar, and one that time has probably forgotten a little bit. I think most people do not think of an offset V shape when they think of a modern guitar anymore. That was probably the 80s, maybe the 90s. And then we've kind of come back to a renaissance of the traditional with guitars like this PRS McCarty 594, which is basically not a perfect replica of a Gibson, but it's a more Gibson-esque traditional guitar with a slightly shortened scale length there, the 24.594. So anyway, that's what more modern guitars tend to look and sound like. So this is more of a throwback style guitar. It's certainly aiming for a bygone era where metal was king, and you would hear it on the radio, and you would hear guitar players on the radio, and everybody had a kind of a general idea of the music that was being produced and released. But now it's so disparate that it's impossible to know what one person is listening to versus another. And that's a whole other debate. But either way, this guitar, I think, certainly has a place in the modern guitar repertoire. I think that it can be used in a lot of different contexts, not just the metal genre. But if you want to rock this guitar on stage with some jazz, I don't know, that might be pushing a little bit, but anything that's in the hard rock to pop to metal territory, this guitar really excels. So if you get a chance to pick one up, I say go for it, and hopefully the market won't go too crazy. But either way, I think that these are a really great buy right now, and that's changing every day. So maybe in the future that will not be the case. But pick them up while you can. So this has been Tanner's Favorite Things with the Peavey Vortex 2 from 1985. If you have any questions, comments, anything on your mind, leave it in the comments below and I will get to it as soon as I can. So thank you. Hit subscribe and like if you do like this content, and I hope to see you on the next one.